This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
It's the power of Christ that compels you. The power of Christ compels you.
The church has always understood from her long experience that the demonic is real, that it needs to be battled. I thought we'd talk about it today. I've invited Adam Blai, who works in the Chancery and the Tribunal for the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Adam, it's been a long time since you and I had a chance to talk, but welcome back.
Yeah, so exorcism, we have a unique position with the full authority of Jesus that he gave to the apostles that resides in our bishops. There have been times when exorcism was done by lay people, when there weren't priests around, and it tended to be the holy people, the ascetics, the St. Anthony of the desert types that were called on to do exorcism.
You know, we're in a different time right now. Would you caution somebody who's saying, look, my home has this services, I'm really worried about this person, I really think that they've been dabbling in the occult and there's a spirit in them, to try to exorcise that demon? Do you need the authority of the Catholic Church behind you in order to liberate somebody from that type of affliction?
Yeah, you do. And here's a good analogy, Drew. You know, say you or I, we're not police officers, we're not law enforcement. Let's say we see an armed criminal committing a crime, and we say, okay, I'm going to go do a citizen's arrest. I'm going to apprehend that person and subdue them and, call the police and hold them down until the police get here. Mm-hmm. Well, if I decide to try to do that, I don't have the authority that a law enforcement officer has. I don't have the legal powers to use force in the same way a law enforcement officer does. And I don't have the backup of the whole government system behind me in case things go south. That's kind of what it's like to attempt to do an exorcism without the proper authority behind you and the backing of the church. And so what we see, and, this is not just armchair picking on people saying, you have to be Catholic or you can't do this. We see cases that arise out of people attempting to do exorcisms when they don't have proper authority. So it's a very real thing. You're essentially challenging a fallen angel and consenting to it pushing back because you've issued a challenge. You've tried to give it an order, and you need the backing of God behind you in the form of his church to do that safely.
Joanna is in Highland, New York. Joanna, thank you for waiting. You're on the air with Adam Blai.
I was just wondering, how do you tell the difference between someone who is mentally ill or someone who is afflicted with demons, especially if maybe been dealing or looking at pornography, or not necessarily the occult, but maybe someone who has an addiction or things like that? How do you tell the difference?
Well, you have to be careful with the words there. So for demons to have an effect on us, that's their normal activity. That's temptation. And so we can expect to be tempted basically from cradle to grave in this life. And so they're going to have an effect on us. Now, the extraordinary effect of possession, that's a different type of impact on a person. And the church figured out centuries ago that to separate that from medical and mental problems, you need to document certain signs that cannot be explained. So, for instance, schizophrenia doesn't make you suddenly fluent in any language that you question the person in, no matter what language it is, and also give them the ability to speak all those languages. Manic depression or epilepsy doesn't make you suddenly know the secret sins of the people that are in the room that you would have no way of knowing. The next one is detecting the holy. So essentially knowing which of the 10 bottles of water on the table are blessed and being able to pick that out every single time correctly.
Wow.
And the last one is kind of a supernatural strength. That's the weakest of the signs because we do see pretty amazing strength in psychiatric settings. But with the demonic, they never get tired. It'll go for hours.
Wow, that's fascinating. So what happens here? How does the church do this? I guess it's part of Joanna's questions, too. And I'd love to get to the pornography aspect of what she brought up, too. But the church is very prudent. So say somebody is exhibiting bizarre behavior or signs of possible spiritual affliction or even possession. You will send them first, right, to a psychiatrist to make sure that this is not schizophrenia or some sort of other mental ailment, right? And then that psychiatrist, when he says, hey, it's not, then do you make the determination it's spiritual en route?
Well, it's a little more complicated, Drew. So some people, it's very obvious they're mentally ill. I have some background in, working in mental health and forensic settings. With some people, it's obvious, and when you ask them, well, did you change your meds or go off your meds? And they're like, yeah, I did 2 weeks before all this started or a few days before. It can be pretty obvious that you just need to get them, cooperating with their doctor again. Now, if it's not super clear that it's mental illness or a medical problem, yes, we basically insist if we're going to work with you, you've got to tell your doctor and cooperate with their treatment. In the meantime, while you're doing that, we will pray for healing for you. We won't just start doing exorcisms because you tell us, you demand it. But we will pray for healing for you. And in the process of doing that, if we see the signs of possession, then we can approach the bishop and say, we've seen these signs. Would you give permission? But we would not proceed with those diagnostic prayer sessions if the person's not cooperating with their doctors, because you could cause a lot of harm that way.
Some of the possessed have the ability to know which bottles of water have been blessed and others aren't, which are holy water. I heard a story once about a witch where there was unconsecrated hosts thrown all over a floor, but there was one consecrated host, and she was able to identify which one that is. What do? They sense the holiness in that, the sacredness?
The demon experiences blessed and holy things as painful to them. So for us, it's a blessing, it's a grace. For them, it's more of God. They describe things that are holy, like holy water, as burning them when they're splashed with it. So they're detecting or picking that up because these are spirits. They live in the spiritual reality. They're just manifesting through this body. Yeah. So they knew full well what objects in the room are blessed or not.
Yeah. Joanna also mentioned pornography. I would think in your work you must see so many people that have, that's almost the key that opens the door for so many of these demonic spirits. And I don't want to scare people, but there's probably a lot of people right now thinking, I'm worried about my husband or my brother or my son or whatever it is. How do you identify if that addiction is more than psychological, but it may actually be rooted in spirits of lust or some other demonic entity?
Drew, it's really hard to be sure and, to give a litmus test and say this is how you would tell. But what we look for is other signs that go along with the problem. So if the person says, well, I stopped going to Mass and confession about 2 years ago when I got addicted to porn. Yeah. And for some reason, there's always something comes up and I just never go anymore. Mm-hmm. Now that might be psychological. They're feeling guilty about what they're doing, but it might be spiritual too. And if you ask a lot of questions and if you see other indications of kind of spiritual oppression, and that can be super tricky to diagnose, you would add prayer to it. But the other thing is prayer never hurts. So you want to pray for deliverance from the beginning because remember, Jesus heals and frees us from all kinds of bondage. So even if the addiction to porn is just purely, material, it still is something that needs to be healed because it's an addiction to sin, and we can pray for that.
Marco is up next. He's in Dinuba, California. Hi, Marco. Good afternoon.
What's the youngest that someone could be possessed, maybe like from birth, or what is the youngest? If someone is possessed at any age, can they walk into the church and receive Christ? Okay,
so the first question, yes, some people are possessed basically if their parents give them over, kind of the opposite of a baptism, they can be possessed in theory even before they're born because if they're consecrated over to the demonic in the womb. Now, what I've seen in actual practice is that Jesus restricts the activity of the demon to afflict the person until they can grow up, gain reason, and make their own choice about sin. And then if they choose sin that demon promotes, then the possession becomes active. But in fairness, it seems that God doesn't allow them to just suffer just because of what their parents chose. That's what I've seen so far with that. So usually you don't see children that are possessed. God holds the demon back until the child can grow up and start making choices for themselves. The question of can they receive our Lord, if a possessed person tries to go to Mass, they almost always will flee either before the Sanctus, which is the angelic hymn that demons were, when they were holy angels, they were created to sing in heaven, or at the consecration, definitely the person will flee the church. It is very rare that they would be able to actually receive communion. That would be a tremendous grace for, say, a Catholic who was in a state of grace, who was a very prayerful person, but was also possessed. I've seen them receive the grace of being able to receive communion, but I would say 19 times out of 20, the person will flee before the Mass is even half done.
Adam, we'll have you back. I know you're super busy. The book, The History of Exorcism, if people want it, I'm assuming just go online. Is it available to major bookstores too?
Yeah, it is.
History of Exorcism by Adam B.L.A.I. And if you want to get it right now, go to sophiainstitute.org. I appreciate your great work.
Oh, I appreciate you, Drew.